Quite often Sotheby's plays a part in the provenance of an important artwork. I think over the decades we've sold artworks, collections, which become legendary in their own right. But I think in this case, the artwork itself was created at Sotheby's. I think it's a very unique situation in which the auction house participated in the creation of the artwork. Sotheby's didn't choose to do this, Sotheby's was chosen.
Sotheby's is the temporary custodian of some of the world's most rare, remarkable and coveted art and objects. In each episode, we'll be exploring the significance and journey of an extraordinary work told by those who know it best. This is The Specialist. The shredding of Banksy's Girl with Balloon live at auction in 2018 has gone down in art history. Alex Branczik, Sotheby's chairman and head of modern and contemporary art for Europe and Asia, witnessed the incident and was pivotal to what followed. On today's episode, the untold story of how Sotheby's manoeuvred the newly titled Lovers in the Bin through a media storm and into a new market moment. Let's join Alex now with more.
The first time we sold Banksy at Sotheby's was in our Olympia sale room in probably 2003, 2004. He is a street artist from Bristol originally, but I think over the course of certainly coinciding with my time at Sotheby's the last 20 years, he's gone from being a street artist collected by street art collectors to being one of the most sought after contemporary artists, held in amazing collections alongside everything from Picasso, Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud, and so on. Whether he likes it or not, he has become one of the elites of the art market. And that's a far cry from his early days tagging walls in Bristol. So the original artwork was entitled Girl with Balloon, which is a standard image for Banksy. And I remember it because at the time, no Banksy had made anywhere close to £1 million. It was consigned by Banksy's press officer at the time. Their only request was that it was in the evening sale and that it should be on view during the auction. Usually Banksy wouldn't want works that he'd gifted being sold, but in this case, he had given it his blessing. You know, when I look back at it, why his team were able to do what they do is because they knew how we worked so well. They knew our motivations, and because every Banksy that we've ever sold, we've had to run through pest control, his organisation. They knew our touch points, they knew how we work, they knew our deadlines, they knew how to get around them, and he did so brilliantly. It was a big night. So it was our October evening sale in 2018. And it had good interest from the start because it came in with a very attractive estimate, £200,000 to £300,000. It's a very popular image. So we knew from the beginning that this would sell very well. And sure enough, on the day of the sale, we had a number of telephones and good competition. And so we knew that it was going to sell. So the lot before had been the Cause, which sold very, very well. And I actually, for some reason, I think I had 2 telephones. And I was bidding with somebody on the Banksy. And in the end, it sold, I think the last 2 bidders, we had 2 representatives from our German offices bidding against each other on the telephones. And the hammer came down and it sold well, £800,000 hammer against an estimate of 200,000. An alarm went off. That was the most noticeable thing, an audible sign that something's up. I realised immediately what had happened. Because suddenly, in that moment, all these slightly odd individual things that had occurred throughout the consignment process suddenly made sense. And I was like, You can see me, I'm laughing. I'm talking on the telephone to one of the bidders, explaining what's going on. I was very quick to understand what it was and to take it in the spirit in which I think it was intended. You know, straight after the auction, as we always do, there's a press conference. And we have an amazing press team. Lots of the press were asking questions about whether it would be a binding sale. And I sort of put my hands up and said, you'll have to forgive me. This is the first time this has ever happened. We need a bit of homework and we'll come back to you. But the period after the sale was genuinely one of the most frantic of my career at Sotheby's. The sale was on a Friday night. And I remember this. I woke up the next morning. I was supposed to be on the rostrum for the day sale the next day. And I looked at my phone and without any exaggeration, my inbox was literally hundreds of journalists from different publications and were calling me off the hook. It was very clear to me at that moment that this had gone completely viral. Our then CEO, he called me and he made me swear that I didn't know and that none of my team knew that this was about to happen. And that was very easy for me to do. But it made no sense for, Banksy, who is far too sophisticated and has far too much integrity in what he does, to actually collude. It would completely diminish the impact of what he was doing. So it obviously made no sense for us to be involved, despite everybody wanting it to be the case. And I was guided by the strong conviction that there was no harm intended, there was no wrongdoing. We're not the only famous institution to have been pranked by Banksy. He's managed to secrete paintings into the Met, to MoMA, to the British Museum, to Tate, and this is Sotheby's. And he's done it, and kudos. It was an off-the-cuff comment that I made when we came off the rostrum to the press, and I said, we've been Banksy'd. And I think we handled it very successfully because, we turned it into an artwork that was created at Sotheby's, piece of performance art. And I think probably wound up Banksy in the process because it sort of sewed it all up a little bit too neatly. This is an auction business. We are governed by laws and by compliance. It was a challenge because, we sell something as it is listed in the catalogue, as it is described in the catalogue. This was a painting called Girl with Balloon. And the work that is then, available to take home is something completely different. Now, you could compare it to something being damaged, and in which case, yes, the buyer wouldn't need to continue with the purchase. But in this case, it was bought by a very private European collector who just really loved the image and had wanted a Girl with Balloon. And what was available to her, having just bid the record price for the artist, was a half shredded painting. To begin with, gave them the opportunity to decide whether they wanted to continue with the purchase. On the other side, we had a consignor who technically we owe £850,000 to. So if the purchase doesn't happen, there's a certain amount of pressure on there to make sure that it does go through. And whether the consignor, who was Banksy's press agent at the time, would actually expect to be paid, or whether they would sort of graciously, walk away and say, it was just a joke and I'm sorry. I needed to afford the buyer some time. I think it took her almost a week to make the decision. The buyer agreed to the sale. We put it back on view in New Bond Street. And in the pouring rain, we had people queuing around the block to see it. We had people flying in just to see this thing. And it just becomes such an incredible overnight phenomenon. I think it was a year later or 2 years later, and I was at a party at Ivor Bracker's house during Freeze, and this very elegant lady stuck out her finger and literally poked me. And she just said, Banksy. At that moment, I suddenly realised who this woman was, because I'd never met her throughout this whole process. It was actually a wonderful moment, because this thing had both we didn't choose our roles in this, right? She was bidding on a painting and I was just doing my job. I had told her at the time that I did believe that this is worth more for what's happened. But prices went so high very, very quickly. And she came with the idea to sell. It was exactly 3 years later in the same sale room. We did have to fight for it. It was competitive with other auction houses, but it would have been impossible for any other auction house to do it justice. It was in at £4 to £6 million, so 4 times what it had sold for previously. We timed it absolutely at the top of the market, and it is still today the record price for the artist, and saw deep, deep bidding. We expected a price in excess of £10 million, but in the end it sold for 19. The power of an auction really can't be underestimated. There is no way we would have been able to achieve this price through a private sale. And I think when you've got something truly unique, truly exceptional, and in a market with a rising tide, there is nothing better than auction for achieving the highest price. It takes confidence in the team and trust in the expertise. That trust goes beyond just the specialists. I say, I do think the press team were so instrumental. We can advertise, we can pay to market things, we can ship things around the world, but really it's the press, especially with something like this, which has that sort of capacity to go viral. And getting that correct and getting that messaging correct is so important in so much of what we do. Understand the right angles with the media, going to the right publications. I think that can't be underestimated. It's the best thing about Sotheby's is when you have an auction, when you have something great, it gets the full weight of the entire business behind it, and that's where we see our best results. In that time, I think Banksy has gone from being a sort of collected by street art collectors to being in the great collections alongside some of the great artists of the 20th and 21st centuries. This has done something to help the perception of him as an artist. I think it'll be one of those moments that goes down in Sotheby's history. We've sold so many important and great artworks over time, and for it to happen at Sotheby's, for it to be created at Sotheby's, is something truly unique.
Thank you for joining us on The Specialist. This has been brought to you by Sotheby's Financial Services. SFS offers asset-based loans to unlock the value of your fine art, automobiles, and other luxury collectibles. To step further into the world of Sotheby's, visit any one of our galleries, which are open to the public. Go to sotheby's.com to find out more.